There are a lot of different ways to approach storytelling in virtual reality. Some articles describe 4 essential modes, while others list up to 27 supposedly discrete techniques. To keep it simple, this video explores just 2 general strategies of room-scale VR storytelling. There are experiences in which interaction is incidental, and then there are experiences in which interaction is instrumental. The former camp relies on the passage of time to tell a story, and is often referred to as broadly, though not necessarily, passive. The latter category pivots on simple, yet well-designed and well-motivated interactions, and is by definition more active. My argument in a nutshell is that when it comes to leveraging the power of VR for narrative ends, instrumental interaction is superior to incidental interaction. But before we talk about interaction as storytelling through the lens of this pop psychology classic, let's first look at how the legacy of cinema is evident in the incidental interaction approach to VR storytelling.
Frog's gonna leap, gator's gonna bite, a grey wolf pack is gonna rule the night.
This is Crow, the Legend by Baobab Studios. It's a prime example of an experience with incidental interaction because it only appears to require participation. Neither the code nor the characters really care if you're there. And as with film, storytelling is resolutely time-bound, it's uninterruptible. You can pause the experience, but you can't make it idle. See, the paradox in Crow is that it's implied that you're an entity with both diegetic presence and diegetic agency. You're the spirit of the seasons, endowed with the magical ability to turn summer into winter. Except you can't do so at will, only when prompted to.
Wave your branches. Come on, wave your hands.
And you're also conveniently invisible. But Crow's peculiar defining trait, as mentioned, is interaction being included yet remaining fully optional. The experience plays out regardless of whether you get involved. In this sense, Crow retains the fourth wall of theatre and cinema despite putatively casting you as a character. Another hallmark of cinema is the way Crow abridges the hero's journey into the cosmos. Narration compresses time and space via good old-fashioned ellipses, which here double as scene transitions.
So Crow began his journey.
We're so used to ellipses in film, specifically jumps forward in time, prolipses, that we can infer what's been omitted and what's being communicated without even consciously registering the edits.
Killers, Frank again. One other thing about your cottage. It's not ready.
But in VR, ellipses can feel somewhat conspicuous. That said, other incidentally interactive experiences like Pearl trade exclusively in ellipses, and in establishing both rhythm and narrative motivation manage to be incredibly emotive in so doing.
When the wind begins to rise, I hope your mast stands straight and tall. These are fragile times.
Taken together, the features just described, the fourth wall, the scene transitions, the way the story chugs on uninterruptibly, are both symptoms and causes of how and why Crow sticks with the familiar narrational style of cinema. Given the purely incidental nature of interaction, I think it's fair to say Crow would retain much of its charm, and my gosh is it charming, even if rendered as 360 video. And much like 360 video, there are plenty of room-scale VR experiences that are upfront and open about their intention for you to just sit back and enjoy the ride. For example, there's The Bond, in which you're switched between comfortable extra-diegetic and nausea-inducing diegetic perspectives. There's Allumette, in which you're positioned as a giant extra-diegetic voyeur. And then there's Piggy. Piggy makes eye contact with you and is therefore clearly aware of your presence, but all this takes place on such an abstract plane that it doesn't really make sense to question who you're supposed to be, how you got there, or where the music is coming from.
Stop. Let me out.
What these 3 experiences share is that there's no pretension of you being able to affect the story. The only interactivity comes from the incidental head movements that you use to survey the scene and track the action. This so-called passive approach doesn't always mean positioning you as an invisible observer. Interaction can be incidental even when your character is the focus of the story. Rexodus, a VR story experience, casts you in a key role with diegetic presence but no diegetic agency, meaning the other characters look at you and talk to you while you just stand there.
Don't touch the weapon. Don't move.
You're informed that only you can save the universe or something, and yet you're powerless to act when an alien bursts through the floor and eats you.
Look out! Scatter!
Let's move on to an interesting phenomenon related to VR, illusory self-motion. This here is Colossae. The experience is brief and open to interpretation, but its relatively pared down use of movement lends the narration a contemplative feel that echoes the apparently poignant themes of the work. In short, there's a brief stint of forced or illusory self-motion, but Colossae doesn't overdo it. Now compare this understated approach with the hyper-cinematic Kingdom City Drowning or cinematic viewing mode in The Great Sea. Almost every shot is a dynamic camera movement. You're constantly sweeping, tracking, or panning, all of which leaves you wondering, am I supposed to be a disembodied flying camera? Because that doesn't gel with the fact that I can still feel and utilise my actual physical body. One moment the characters are tiny, the next they're huge. One moment you're chest deep in the floor, the next you're jutting out of a wall looking downwards. You instinctively try to follow the character's line of sight, but by the time you've turned to see what they're looking at, you've been repositioned and find yourself staring into empty space.
I take no pleasure in this.
Leave her alone!
If the objective here is to constantly remind someone that the experience is a mediated presentation, then fine. But if turning simple spatial presence into deep psychological immersion is the goal, which it should be, then I'd say this is far from ideal. A better solution is to let the participant be in control of whatever they're embodied as. It's not my place to prescribe a right way and a wrong way to do VR, but relying on cinematography and something resembling editing to narrate your story is demonstrably bad practice, not least because it's uncomfortable and may even cause motion sickness. Of course, someone had to test the water. VR is virgin territory, and innovation presupposes experimentation and the occasional leap of faith. Moreover, a lot of VR creators are coming from a background in film. When former Pixar employees were chosen to head up the now-defunct Oculus Story studio, they carried forth the dictum that story is king. At Pixar, this motto clearly has currency. The stories they tell are structurally and aesthetically conventional and very much tailored to the silver screen. You witness someone's hardships, you see them undertake a journey of personal growth, and then all the loose ends are tied up before your very eyes. Story is king. But why make this your point of departure for VR? VR isn't film. Even though the oxymoron of VR film is being thrown around, you don't have to be a spectator. You can play an active role in the story, and the diegetic perspective that comes with that will colour participants' experience of story. This different type of experience, in turn, will challenge a lot of filmmakers' implicit assumptions about what story is, what it can be, and hopefully whether or not it still needs to be considered king. Obviously, interactive storytelling is neither new nor exclusive to VR, but it's worth discussing specifically in the context of VR that doesn't fit neatly into the box labelled games. Moving forward then, we should ask, in the context of participatory narrative VR, does story still shine through, or is it partially eclipsed? Is our perception of story altered, and if so, how should designers respond to that? Reading the synopses of these landmark VR experiences, there's certainly not much that screams story in a traditional sense, at least on paper. But VR is no more paper than it is film, so let's examine a class of experiences in which interaction is not incidental, but very much instrumental to the process of narration. This is Accounting and Accounting Plus by Crows and Justin Roiland, and this is Virtual Reality by Tenderclaws. What's striking about both of these experiences, besides their incisive humour, is the apparent fluidity and effortlessness with which they unfold. Gone are ellipses and gone are scene transitions instigated by anyone but yourself. There's almost no focus on exposition. You're not inundated with details about the characters' backstories or past events. All of these things are either self-evident or significantly de-emphasized. Instead, the focus is on your moment-to-moment experience in which the parallel processes of interaction and narration appear so expertly blended as to be effectively self-effacing.
Pick up my bomb and you're protected! Don't let
And when you're interacting, which is pretty much all the time, it seems as though you pay less attention to plot. But that doesn't mean that there is no plot. There's still a consistent causal logic underpinning the progression of events. It's just that when you're in the driving seat, when you're embodied as the primary narrative agent, story feels ancillary to the immediacy of goal-directed thoughts and behaviours. The possibility spaces in accounting and virtual reality are fairly narrow. Their worlds are more or less structurally linear, and yet your journey through them will take on an undeniably organic feel. Narration never feels arrested, and you never feel limited, even though logic-wise, programming-wise, the experiences are structured as a series of discrete interactions constituting successive self-contained scenarios to be completed in a strict, predetermined order. Typically, each correct action will elicit a response in the form of an animation and an audio clip. And you don't need a technical understanding of how triggers and scripting are used to cue events under the hood. These experiences are persuasive, they're enrapturing, and crucially, they're intuitable by anyone.
Processing that thinks about itself in real time.
To make interactions as intuitable as possible, Don Norman, patron saint of UX design, advocates embedding knowledge in the world. The designer can put sufficient cues into the design, he says, that good performance results even in the absence of previous knowledge. Good performance is essentially what's happening when accounting and virtual reality make you feel like an expert negotiator of these outlandish, never-before-seen situations. Similarly, I could mention Valve's robot repair,
It's you.
Oculus's First Contact demo, Museum of Symmetry,
That's great!
A Short History of the Gays, and the Gnomes and Goblins preview, seemingly now shelved. In all these standout experiences, we're delivered prompts and other relevant information at a pace and a level of granularity that's supportive of both our ongoing interactions and our understanding of our roles within the story worlds. Interaction thus doubles as the primary mode of narration, the telling part in storytelling. I'd speculate that it feels so rich and seamless mainly because of how basic your repertoire of actions is. The bread and butter of these experiences is pointing, putting, pulling, throwing, pouring, and other simple ings that you can perform almost without thinking. These simple actions are dressed up in fantastical yet instantly intelligible game world representations. This makes them meaningful in the context of the story rather than arbitrary, and lets us spot affordances without cognitive effort. Affordances, of course, define what actions are possible, and are jointly determined by the qualities of the object and the abilities of the agent that is interacting. Here's an example from accounting.
This is a witch trial.
I'm on trial for the most heinous of crimes. I am larger than my little public defender. I have a hand, and the judge is all the way over there. The relationship between my abilities and my defense attorney's diminutive form means there's really only one sensible course of action.
Whoa, hey, we don't know it. Shit! Oh.
Alright, that's it!
But not all virtual affordances can be perceived on the basis of real-world logic or experience. Sometimes we need pointing in the right direction.
Get out of here! You don't know how to use those goggles?
The communicative side of Don Norman's design framework comprises signifiers and feedback. Signifiers are signposts or instructions so transparent that they barely require decoding. Signifiers tell us there's an affordance here and maybe hint at what it is. In product design, signifiers try to be sleek and unobtrusive and ideally non-linguistic. But in VR storytelling, signifiers can be ridiculously overt and still enhance rather than detract from the experience.
I eat everything and I don't poop for— Oh, there's my knife! Thank you! Thank you for cleaning up my mess. I couldn't have done it without you. I'm so glad that you're here with me.
Hey, whoa, don't mess with that cabinet. Don't, what are you touching the cabinet about?
Wait.
Put the acid down, bro.
Oh my god. No.
Clearly, in playful contexts such as these, you can explicitly tell someone not to do something and they'll take it as signification that maybe they should.
I see you looking at that window. Don't throw the brick. No. Don't throw the brick through that window, Scooter. You have to lob me right into the window of fucking Bessie's.
And in most of these examples, the character's reactions serve also as feedback.
Well, now you've done it.
Feedback is communicating the results of an action. It must be immediate. Even a delay of 1/10 of a second can be disconcerting. In VR storytelling, feedback means letting the participant know that their action has been acknowledged as somehow meaningful, even if it wasn't an action that actively advances the story.
Jimmy, that's a home run!
I'd probably go so far as to claim that the more pointless the interaction, the more richness, depth, and believability is added to the story world when you receive some unexpected feedback.
Hey, what the fuck? Oh my god! Scooter's holding the porno man! Okay, Scoot! What? Oh shit! Scooter's downloading illegally on the laptop!
According to Don Norman, the key ingredients of feedback are clarity and punctuality, and I'm inclined to agree that a few milliseconds can make all the difference. This is Retne or Retni. It boasts an imaginative concept, quality asset design, and professional voice acting. It follows the same storytelling strategy as accounting and virtual reality, but ultimately feels rushed and rough around the edges.
Hey, what are they doing now?
The character's vocalizations are supposed to acknowledge and add weight to your actions, but the way he emotes with a slight delay and sometimes seemingly at random ends up adding to the confusion of the experience's already disjointed tasks and situations.
Best describes your satisfaction with my services to you today. Ooh, tough crowd. There goes the job. I know you didn't mean it.
A character's verbal confirmation that you did a thing is perhaps optimal, but obviously doesn't fit every narrative scenario.
Stop.
Professor Janet Murray argues against the inclusion of any non-diegetic audio, but check out how effectively background music is put to use in accounting. First there's the transition from this blissful harp and vocal piece to a sneaky, furtive sounding track which both indicates and constitutes a change in tone or mood. And then, it's hard to hear over all the shouting, but each correct action you perform seems to add another layer or instrument to the mix, first bringing in a glockenspiel, then a bassoon, then a timpani, all while building a sense of anticipation, of edging towards a dramatic climax, and communicating the results of your actions. Now that's quality feedback. I segued into the second part of this video with the provocation that story is no longer king. Instead, in VR storytelling, interaction and the resulting experience may be the best way to communicate narrative information. Whatever strategy you adopt, my best advice is to forget exposition and consider putting plot on the back burner. Throw out the cinematography and editing handbook and instead start thinking in terms of actions, affordances, signifiers and feedback. What you'll find yourself working with is environmental storytelling via areas of interest and engaging, surprising interactions. Pontification aside, VR is one of the least developed storytelling forms. It's all to play for, really, and the perspective I've introduced here is supposed to be ad hoc, not authoritative. There's also a lot I didn't cover. Conspicuously missing from this video are time control experiences,
I've been looking for you.
I've been looking for you too.
dramatised documentaries that use volumetric video,
I see the dildo, I see Eric's face.
Iran's infrastructure is being targeted.
and experiences that let you tell and share stories.
As a creator, I really like to make levels for video games.
Lastly, I've deliberately avoided using terminology from game design or referring to these VR experiences as games, even if their creators have labelled them games. All in all though, I've tried to avoid making absolute statements because the VR landscape will change profoundly in the coming years, and in the process probably also alter our conception of PC or console gaming, not to mention video graphic productions. I hope you're excited as I am to see more VR experiences that employ instrumental interaction as storytelling rather than adding incidental interaction as an afterthought. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.